say yes to your life. And when it comes to drugs and alcohol, just say no.
It's time, as Nancy said, for America to just say no to drugs.
Barry Butters does. James Bond, License to Kill. So in the previous review I said that Timothy Dalton's first film as Bond was almost perfect. It was only really let down by the fact that it had a really terrible villain. So what about this film? Well, in my opinion, this film gets almost everything right. It's an elegantly told story with lots of drama and suspense. And for me, it's one of the James Bond films that comes closest to realising the original Ian Fleming vision of Bond. Yeah, so this is a real treat, this one. So let's make like Dario and get stuck in. So the tone of this film is basically the same as the previous film, but they do take the violence and cruelty up a notch. When Fran Sanchez removes the art of the bloke who just had sex with his girlfriend.
What did he promise you? His heart? Give her his heart.
And they also take it a stage further than that, because he starts whipping her immediately afterwards.
Not a word.
As well as the fact that they show this scene of domestic violence, you also see the consequences of this later on, where you see the whip marks at the base of her back. So this film is a lot more cruel and brutal than any James Bond film that we've seen before. And for this reason, it's a lot closer to the original Ian Fleming vision of Bond.
Timothy and I talked at great length about, how we were going to try and go back more to a sort of a harder age Bond.
He was always looking for something meatier to do with more passion in it.
Also, we felt, more importantly, that this type of character suited Timothy Dalton. I think in this particular movie, I think we're truer to the Fleming characters. And that's something that Timothy Dalton felt very strongly about as well.
We then see things like Felix Leiter getting his left leg bitten off by a shark.
See you in hell! No. Today's the first day of the rest of your life.
Now, of course, we have seen people being fed to sharks in James Bond films before, but it hasn't been quite so graphic before. And you haven't seen such a level of cruelty on the part of the villains before either, where they take a sort of sadistic pleasure in inflicting cruelty. Now, of course, you did see some of this with Zorin in A View to a Kill, but on that occasion it was a bit more like a comic book treatment, whereas this time it feels a lot more realistic. They also dump his body back in his house inside a body bag, and they leave a note on his body that has this very dark sense of humour. He disagreed with something that ate him. You also see a similar sort of cruelty later on, where Milton Crest's men kill Sharky in a very cruel and callous manner.
Nice work, Clive. Thanks, Mr. Crest. Guess what? His name was Sharky.
You've also got this scene in the film later on where Sanchez locks Crest in a decompression chamber, and he causes his head to explode by cutting the oxygen supply. And that's what I call a very brutal and gory scene. And more than any other Bond actor before, Timothy Dalton understands that Bond is actually an anti-hero.
One of the interesting things about Bond is that he's just as bad as they are. I mean, the books come back to this theme time and again. I think that's one of the reasons why maybe if we talked about The Living Daylights before, this theme of acidity, malaise keeps creeping back into each of the books. The real sense of distaste for who he is, what he is, and the world he's working in because he's old enough to recognize himself. He says time and again, or someone says time and again, he's just as bad. He's a murderer, a killer. Cold, cruel, ruthless killer. He just happens to be working for the side that's called good.
And all of this corresponds very closely to the Ian Fleming vision of Bond.
My leading character, James Bond, I never intended to be a hero. I intended him to be a sort of blunt instrument wielded by a government department who would get into bizarre and fantastic situations and more or less shoot his way out of them.
And unlike the previous films, this is also a more cynical Bond universe, because you got the fact that DEA agents can be bribed and bought off.
Kill him. Sorry, old buddy, but $2 million is a hell of a chunk of dough.
So you got a sort of blurring of lines between the good guys and the bad guys. And this is very different, of course, from the earlier Bonds. A good example of this is something I mentioned in the Thunderball review, in relation to NATO. Because in the novel it was a corrupt NATO pilot who's paid off by Spectre. So it showed the corruptible nature of institutions. And it sort of blurred the line between the good guys and the bad guys. Whereas in the film they got rid of this idea. And they substituted this with the idea of a Spectre pilot who'd managed to infiltrate NATO by using cosmetic surgery. So all of that's to say that Licence to Kill is much closer to the original Fleming vision of Bond. So I'd say Bond's cruel and callous execution of Ed Killefer is probably the biggest Bond bastard moment that we've seen so far.
I'll split it with you. You earned it. You keep it, old buddy.
And we see the bastard Bond again with how Bond treats women in this film. First with Lupe.
Make a sound, and you're dead.
And then with Pam.
What the hell is the matter with you?
Just a couple of things. Fang and his team of British agents, they're dead. Sanchez is alive. I saw you in Hella's office. You're working with them.
No!
I want the truth.
I am telling the truth.
I should probably say here that like The Living Daylights, despite having a more serious and grittier tone, that Licence to Kill also contains all or most of the things that we've come to associate with Bond films over the years, in terms of iconography, supporting characters and set pieces. Now in terms of the suits, there's a slight scaling back this time, which actually kind of makes sense this time because Bond is living out of a suitcase after quitting MI6 and going on the run. But incidentally, this is the third time that Bond has worn a cravat. He also wears a black DJ in this film too. And he's got the old trusty PPK again. And as in the previous film, Bond also gets to use a sniper rifle in this film. Although it's not actually the same type of sniper rifle. And as with the previous film, Bond also smokes cigarettes in this film. But this film also contains a warning about cigarettes from the Surgeon General. This film's also got a fair number of gadgets. First of all, you got this exploding alarm clock. Then you got this plastic explosive disguised as a tube of toothpaste.
Nice.
And then you got this component on Bond's sniper rifle. So it's actually a signature gun that only responds to Bond's handprint. And then you got this Polaroid camera, and that fires a deadly laser beam. And in terms of the Bond girls, you've only really got 2 this time. Although I think you could say that there's actually 3. Because you got this actress called Diana Lee who plays the part of Lottie, and she plays the role of an Hong Kong narcotics agent. And this girl also figures quite prominently in the credit sequence. Now this American actress was actually a Playboy playmate in 1988, so she didn't actually have much acting experience. And if you look at this deleted scene, you can kind of see why she wasn't given a speaking role, because she completely misdelivers this line.
Who the hell are you?
Be polite and answer the man.
And then you got Sanchez's girlfriend, who's called Lupe Lamora, and she's played by the lovely Talisa Soto. And then you got Pam Bouvier, and she's played by Carrie Lowell. Yeah, so those are the three gorgeous girls that we got this time. But hold on, I feel like I've forgotten someone. Oh yeah, we've also got Della, and that's Felix Leiter's wife, of course. And incidentally, this scene with Della also contains a reference to James Bond's dead wife. Now, I always really like the inclusion of this scene, and I think it's very well handled. Not only because it establishes a continuity between Dalton and the previous Bonds, but also because it adds an extra layer of depth and complexity to Dalton's take on the character of Bond, as a troubled and lonely outsider.
You know the tradition? The next one who catches this is the next one who...
No.
I see something wrong.
He was married once, but it was a long time ago.
This is actually the first time for Dalton, but it's the third time we've seen a reference to Bond's dead wife overall. We saw this in 2 Roger Moore films, for example. First in The Spy Who Loved Me.
Many lady friends, but married only once. Wife killed.
All right, you've made your point.
You're sensitive, Mr. Bond.
About certain things, yes.
And then in the opening of For Your Eyes Only. But what the hell was I talking about before all that? Oh yeah, girls. How could I forget? Yeah, so there you go. I think at a pinch you could say we got 4 Bond girls this time. Although Lupe and Pam are obviously the main 2. Now in terms of the Bond villain, we got Franz Sanchez. And I always think he's kinda similar to Kananga from Live and Let Die. He's the owner of a drug empire and an underground crime syndicate. But Sanchez is also very brutal and sadistic. But in general, I'd say the most distinctive thing about Sanchez is that he's the most realistic Bond villain that we've had so far. So he actually feels like quite a real drugs baron. And I'd say more so than Kananga. Another very distinctive thing about the Bond villain this time is Bond's attitude towards him. Because he actually befriends and then deceives the villain this time.
I help people with problems.
Problem solver.
I'm more of a problem eliminator.
And then later on he makes Sanchez believe that Crest was behind the assassination attempt.
Did they mention a name?
No. Only that they were expecting to be paid a great deal of cash by someone arriving in Isthmus tonight.
And that he also stole his money. So Bond is able to use his skills of subterfuge and deception in order to undermine Sanchez's organisation from within.
You ripped me off, then used my own money to pay someone to kill me? You want it so bad. And take it!
Now there's actually a word for this, and it's
Machiavellianism.
Oh yeah, that's it. Machiavellianism. Now that's what Ollie Goodhead calls a mouthful. By the way, before we move on, I think I just need to say something about Bond's hairstyle. Because in the first scene between Bond and Sanchez, Bond has got his hair slicked back. Now I don't personally care about this issue too much, but I've seen a lot of people talking about it online. I think the thing is, slick back hair don't really suit Timothy Dalton as much as his normal hairstyle. And when it comes down to it, I think there are a couple of other hairstyle mistakes in this film too. All of this is quite subjective, but I reckon that Pam Bouvier looked better with long hair at the start. She still looks nice of course, but I don't think this hairstyle suits her quite as well as the first hairstyle. And while Talisa Soto is a very beautiful woman, I don't think this hairstyle really suits her that much. Especially if you compare her to how she looked in Mortal Kombat, where she had a long ponytail, and she looked absolutely stunning. So I don't really know who we can blame for that. I guess it's either the person in charge of makeup, or possibly the second unit hairstylist. Yeah, so that's either Norma Webb or Di Holt, apparently. Although, to be fair, this was the 1980s, and back then most people had ridiculous haircuts. Anyway, all that's to say, we got Bond again as a symbol of good, and Sanchez as a symbol of evil. Again, in terms of things that we normally see in a James Bond film, we also have the same list of supporting characters. We got a very tense scene between Bond and M this time.
This private vendetta of yours could easily compromise Her Majesty's government. You have an assignment, and I expect you to carry it out objectively and professionally.
Then you have my resignation, sir.
And we only get one very brief scene with Moneypenny this time.
U.S. immigration has no reports of 007 leaving the United States as of 1500 hours today. Who authorized this?
I did, sir.
And then we see old Q again, who meets Bond in the field, where he helps him out unofficially and gives him a bunch of gadgets.
Really, 007?
Q, what the hell are you doing here? I might have killed you.
Well, I'm on leave. Thought I'd pop round and see how you're getting on.
But Q actually gets more screen time in this film than any of the other supporting characters. We see him again when he appears as Bond's driver, then when he's waiting in the hotel room for Bond with Pam, and then when he sort of acts as an intermediary between Bond, Pam and Lupe. And then he also appears in disguise as well. So Q's actually in this film quite a lot. And this is mainly due to the story, of course, because Bond is on the run and he's only actually in contact with Q. And we also see the character of Felix Leiter in this film. And for the first time in the series, we see a returning actor who's played this role before. And that's David Edison, of course, who played the character in Live and Let Die.
Your friend Kanang has just left the UN. He's probably headed back to his embassy. No, don't worry. I've got the place eyeballed, wired for sound, the works. Right. I'll see you in about a half hour.
Now, you're sure you've got the ring?
Relax, Felix.
I had seen Cubby and Dana at the bistro, in the restaurant. And it was all very lovely. Hello, how are you? Nice to see you, looking great.
Cubby said to David was in the other day, he said, he looks pretty good, you know. I said, well, this guy's got a parachute, you know. I said, I think he might be a bit old for the part, you know.
And I think he was a little nervous. Probably thought by now I was on crutches or whatever.
David, he's a great, likable man, and I found myself being swayed.
You what?
And for the first time in a James Bond film, Felix Leiter becomes an integral part of the story. Yeah, so first of all he gets his leg bitten off by a shark, then Bond discovers him in a body bag, and then Bond is by his bedside in hospital. Then Bond talks to him at the end of the film when he's still in hospital but making a recovery. Now, Licence to Kill also stands out for being the last film before there was a massive change of personnel, both in front of and behind the camera. Most obviously, of course, this is the last outing of Timothy Dalton as Bond, but this is also the last film to feature Robert Brown as M, as well as Caroline Bliss as Moneypenny. And then behind the camera, this is the last time that the screenwriter, Richard Maybaum, worked on a James Bond film. And it's also the last film that Maurice Binder worked on. And he'd been doing the titles of the Bond films since Dr. No. And it's also the last Bond film where Albert Broccoli was the producer. And it's also the last Bond film to be directed by John Glenn, who at this point had done 5 Bond films. Yeah, so there you go, that's a massive change of staff. I just hope that the next lot know what they're doing. Like every other Bond film before, we also have the same tried and tested set pieces. We got fist fights, and you got your gun fights, and you got a very nice variation on the car chase this time, with Bond driving a giant fuel truck. You've also got a very nice little daring escape. And you've also got some really great explosions in this film. They're absolutely fucking enormous. And then you've got a nice little sex scene too. And you've got quite a lot of really good stunts in this film too. Probably the two main ones are the opening pre-credits stunt, where Bond captures Sanchez's plane, but this film also contains my favourite stunt of the old James Bond series. And the reason why I like this so much is because it seamlessly blends an underwater segment into a water ski segment that then seamlessly blends into an aerial segment. Now this is a very elaborate stunt, but the thing I like about it is that it don't really break the laws of physics, so it just about feels believable too. So at the start of the sequence, Bond is fighting these blokes underwater, but then he escapes by harpooning the base of this seaplane, and then it drags him along underwater until he's able to water ski behind it. And then after he gains enough momentum, he's actually able to catch onto the seaplane. And then he chucks both of the pilots out of the plane. So finally he takes control of the plane itself. And that brings this rather stunning stunt sequence to an end. And it also manages to advance the story as well, because it provides Bond with the funds he needs to complete his solo mission without the help of MI6. Now the plot of this film is basically a lot more straightforward than The Living Daylights. It's basically just a revenge plot, which was a very common theme in 1980s action films.
Murdoch, I'm coming to get you.
Let off some steam, Bennett.
Funnily enough, Bond kills Sanchez with a lighter to avenge Lighter. Oh, that was a good joke. Well, not really.
The character that I'm playing is very much of a modern woman. She's very self-sufficient and independent, and she doesn't really need a man to make her life complete. That would be nice.
There's more to us than just a flash of a, pretty girl with long legs,
So the treatment of the Bond girl in this film is kind of interesting this time. You basically got a sort of love triangle theme with two girls competing for Bond's affection. And Bond's mission is sort of very skillfully interwoven with this romantic subplot.
If anything happens to him, I don't know what I'll do. I love James so much.
Up you must go before you're missed. Now don't worry, we'll think of something.
I love James so much.
And both girls sort of assist Bond in his mission in different ways. It's a nice idea and it's basically very well done. Although both of these types of Bond girls have appeared before. I tend to think of Lupe Lamora as a slightly tragic character, as a girl who's trapped in an abusive relationship. In this way she's sort of similar to Domino in Thunderball, and Andrea Andes in The Man with a Golden Gun. And Pam Bouvier is basically a tough Bond girl in the tradition of Pussy Galore and Ollie Goodhead. But one problem I have with the Bond girl this time is Bond's unnecessarily cruel rejection of Lupe Lamora at the end.
I think you and El Presidente will make a perfect couple.
The thing is, I always think of Bond's rejection of Lupe Lamora as a bit uncalled for, insofar as she don't really seem to deserve this type of treatment. He could have said something like, "I'm sorry Lupe, you're a lovely girl, but I'm afraid I'm already spoken for." And then she could have sort of looked a bit sad and looked down at the ground or something. Now I don't mind of course that Bond actually chose Pam over Lupe at the end, but I just find the manner of Bond's rejection a bit uncalled for. And this occurs despite the fact that she's helped him over the course of the film. First of all by not revealing his presence on Milton Crest's yacht, and then helping him to escape from Sanchez. During the course of the film, they also imply that there's more to Lupe's relationship with Sanchez than Bond understands.
Don't you men know any other way?
It's Sanchez's way. You seem to like it.
You know nothing. Please go. If they find you, you will both be killed.
But then the film never offers an explanation. They just sort of leave that as fairly mysterious. I think you could say that Lupe Lamora is a bit disloyal, insofar as she's shown to have multiple affairs over the course of the film. But I think if a girl is trapped in a relationship with someone like Sanchez, then she's got a pretty good excuse. But whereas Pam Bouvier is basically an invention of the screenplay, the character Lupe Lamora is inspired by the short story, and that's the Hildebrand rarity. The girl in the short story is actually the wife of Milton Crest, and she's called Elizabeth Crest, and she's an English girl with blonde hair. So superficially her appearance is quite different from Lupe Lamora. But Elizabeth Crest in the short story is also the victim of domestic abuse, and like the short story, the dynamic of the relationship is very similar, and it's also left slightly mysterious. So after Bond meets Elizabeth Crest in the short story, he has this thought: what must this woman have to put up with? This beautiful girl he had got hold of to be his slave, his English slave. And a bit later on, Bond makes another speculation about their relationship. They were certainly a curiously assorted couple, the middle-aged Hemingway with the Bogart voice and a pretty, artless girl. And there was a tension in the air, in the way she had cringed as he brought her to heel when she had offered them drinks. And in the short story, there's a reference to using the tail of a stingray to punish an unfaithful wife. So the first reference to this idea in the short story occurs when this bloke called Fidel Barbie is talking to Bond. And referring to the stingray, Fidel Barbie says to Bond, "Do you want the tail?" Bond smiled, "I haven't got a wife." And then a bit later in the short story, Milton Crest is shown to have one of these stingray tails in his bedroom. It was the tail of a stingray. Casually, Bond walked over to the side of the bed and picked it up. He ran a finger down its spiny gristle. It hurt his finger even to do that. And Bond goes, "Where did you pick that up?" "I was hunting one of these animals this morning." And Milton Crest responds, "Bahrain. The Arabs use them on their wives." So as we saw earlier, the stingray whip is also in the film. So this is a direct influence from the short story. So in the short story, Milton Crest uses it on his wife. Yeah, so Milton Crest says to his wife, "You just earned yourself a little meeting with the corrector this evening. That's what you've gone and done." The girl's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide open. She said in a whisper, "Oh no, Milt. Oh no, please." But in the film, of course, it's Fran Sanchez who uses it on the girl rather than Milton Crest. So like a lot of the James Bond films in the past, the filmmakers of Licence to Kill take a bunch of ideas from the work of Ian Fleming, but they change things around a lot.
This uses an awful lot of Fleming. I mean, you'll recognise when you see it, if you know the books well. Lots of reverberations and echoes, and in some cases precise moments from a variety of books. It just so happens that it's the first time there isn't a Fleming title called Licence Revoked. The title's made up.
So Licence to Kill stands out as being the first film in the series not to use the title of an Ian Fleming story. And for the most part, the story of this film is original material. But the funny thing is, the film also contains elements of Fleming's novel Live and Let Die, as well as the short story called The Hildebrand Rarity. And in addition to that, Licence to Kill also borrows heavily from a Japanese film called Yojimbo, and that's by a famous director called Akira Kurosawa. So despite the fact that it's mostly original material, the adaptation issue is a bit more complicated this time, insofar as it borrows from a very mixed range of sources. So we've already discussed the influence of the Hildebrand Rarity in relationship to Lupe Lamora, but Licence to Kill also borrows the character of Milton Crest from this short story. as well as the fact that he owns a yacht, and he also runs Wavecrest Marine Research. And this is an idea that's also taken from the short story, where Milton Crest runs a charitable organisation called the Wavecrest Foundation. The Elder Brown Rarity is actually a very strange short story, and it's probably my least favourite of the short stories. The short story actually don't have anything to do with drugs. In the short story, the Wavecrest Foundation is just part of an elaborate tax dodge. And it goes like this. You make a foundation, like this one, the Crest Foundation, for charitable purposes. Charitable to anyone. To kids, sick folks, the cause of science. You just give the money away to anyone or anything except yourself, or your dependents, and you escape tax on it. So I put a matter of $10 million into the Crest Foundation. So Milton Crest in the short story is basically just a rich arsehole. And then at the end of the short story he's murdered. But it's actually left unclear as to who actually murdered him. So it's basically a murder mystery where the mystery remains unsolved. So basically the film borrows the character of Milton Crest from the short story, but it makes him subordinate to Fran Sanchez. But as I was saying earlier, the plot of this film is also inspired by Yojimbo.
I think the story was a good story. It was kind of along the lines of the Yojimbo film, if you remember the Kurosawa film, where the samurai goes into town and without really attacking the villain and all of his cohorts, by just sowing the seeds of distrust, he manages to have the villain bring himself down.
I got the guy who set me up.
Only one guy.
What do you mean?
Most of the people that are killed the villain killing off his own henchmen.
You ripped me off, then used my own money to pay someone to kill me?
And the anti-hero of the film, Yojimbo, basically plays both sides off one another. So by using subterfuge and deception, he effectively gets them to destroy one another. Now License to Kill basically uses this same idea. By using a bunch of lies and deception, Bond gets Sanchez to destroy his own organisation from within. And he does this primarily by getting Sanchez to turn against Milton Crest. But despite these similarities, License to Kill ain't so much of a remake of Yojimbo as A Fistful of Dollars. Like Yojimbo, A Fistful of Dollars takes place in a single town. And you've got two warring factions who are fighting for supremacy. And at times, Fistful of Dollars almost feels like a shot-for-shot remake of that film. So the influence of Yojimbo on License to Kill is much broader than that. It just has a big influence on the overriding structure, but it's not really similar at the level of detail. And in License to Kill, Bond only befriends one side of the criminal organisation, whereas in Yojimbo the anti-hero befriends both sides, and he sort of plays both sides against one another. But like in Yojimbo, Bond is effectively like a masterless samurai in this film, because he's had his licence revoked. It's a bit like he's in a position of a Ronin. And luckily enough, Hugo Drax somehow survived being shot into space, and he's got a nice little explanation for us.
47 samurai whose master was betrayed and killed by another lord. They became Ronin, masterless samurai.
The film also borrows an idea from the novel Live and Let Die, insofar as this is the novel where Felix Leiter gets his leg bitten off by a shark. But that nasty little event in the novel is caused by Mr. Big, of course, whereas in the film it's Fran Sanchez. But the novel Live and Let Die is also where the idea for the note came from. He disagreed with something that ate him, and I mentioned this of course in my review of Live and Let Die. But in addition to the Live and Let Die novel, I think you can also see an influence of the film as well. So License to Kill is actually similar to the film Live and Let Die in a variety of ways. Because from the film they take the idea of an exploding villain, as well as having a drug kingpin, as well as the fact that like Kananga, Sanchez has got an underground base. And he also uses religious worship as a cover for his drug operation. Whereas in Live and Let Die it's voodoo, in License to Kill it's this weird meditation centre. In the film of Live and Let Die you got the fictional state of San Monique, and in License to Kill you got Isthmus City. Now, as a general rule, I don't tend to talk about the critical reception of these films, but in the case of Licence to Kill, I think we need to, because there's something rather peculiar about the way people reacted to this film. Yeah, so at the time, a lot of people thought it didn't really seem like a James Bond film, which is kind of ironic because this film seems to me like a true reflection of the original Ian Fleming vision of Bond. But at the time, this bloke called Ian Johnston for the Sunday Times said this: "Any vestiges of The Gentleman Spy by Ian Fleming have now gone." And he said that Dalton's Bond is very similar in deed and action to the eponymous hero of the Batman film. And I don't have any idea what this bloke's going on about. And I don't think he does either. And then you had this bloke called Adam Mars Jones for The Independent, and he made the more interesting point that it was quite similar to a Fleming novel, but made the point that they'd taken most of the dated ideas out, so it didn't have anything to do with imperialism. So he said that they tried to reproduce the recipe while leaving out the ingredients that would now seem distasteful. But this is a rather strange point to make, because none of the James Bond films really touch on the theme of imperialism. They even removed the theme of imperialism from the first James Bond film, Dr. No, way back in 1962. So I'd also say that this bloke don't know his arse from his elbow. And then over in Canada, this bloke called Rick Green, or Groan, I don't know how you say his name. Anyway, he wrote for the Globe and Mail, and he said they excised Bond from the Bond flicks. They turned James into Jimmy, strong and silent, and Roll Over Britannia, downright American. And he said that this was a film that was essentially Bondless. Now, Gary Arnold from the Washington Times made a more intelligent observation, because he did at least recognise that this film came very close to the original Fleming vision of Bond. But he didn't really like this treatment, and he said it was a failure to recognise that the Bond productions are simply too extravagant to permit an uncompromised return to first principles. Yeah, so at least this bloke knows what he's talking about. But then by contrast, you had this very prestigious critic called Roger Ebert, who said that Licence to Kill is one of the best of the recent Bonds. Now, while a lot of people didn't really appreciate this film at the time, over the last 30 years or so, people have finally understood this film. Although some people, of course, still don't like it. So there's this bloke called Tom Hibbert from Empire, and he said that Dalton is really quite hopeless. And then as late as 2006, IGN ranked Licence to Kill as one of the worst Bonds. They said it was too grim and had strayed too far from the Bond formula. Strangely enough, Desmond Llewellyn also criticised the film. He said that although it was a very good film, it wasn't a Bond film. And then this bloke called Norman Wilmer of MSN said that this was the second worst James Bond film. He said that Timothy Dalton was quite unlucky, and that he could have been the definitive 007. He had the bad luck to inherit the role just as the series was at its weakest, struggling to cope with the general creative decline and the end of the Cold War. But then British GQ identified the film as one of the most underrated of the series, and they made the point that the change in tone had caused a lot of upset among the fans. Now, I tend to see this film in a similar way to Raymond Benson, who's the author of 9 James Bond novels, and this is what he had to say. It boggles my mind that Licence to Kill is so controversial. There's really more of a true Ian Fleming story in that script than most of the post-60s Bond movies. So in general, I think the strange critical reception of this film is tied up with how the movies had departed so much from the original Ian Fleming vision of Bond. And they've been moving increasingly far away from this vision in the 70s and 80s. But both of the Timothy Dalton films were an effort to go back to the original Ian Fleming vision of Bond. And movie audiences have become so familiar with this type of Bond movie that this is what they came to expect, while at the same time not really understanding that the films had moved very far away from Ian Fleming. I think this is why so many people were confused about the film when it first came out. I think this film reveals how the critical reception of these films often don't make a lot of sense.
It's one of my best films, probably the best film I've ever done. And I'm very proud of it. I think it's become increasingly popular as time goes by.
When I came to this project, one of the real reasons why I accepted to do it was that Mr. Broccoli had said he wanted to take these films back to, not how they were at the beginning, but he wanted to take them back to the spirit of the earlier films. Back to that style, back to capturing what those films had, and what in fact those films had was they actually contained the spirit of Ian Fleming. They were very much like the books. They were damn good, interesting, romantic action mystery thrillers.
Yeah, so in my opinion, this film is an absolute cracker. It's a slightly darker Bond than the previous film, but it irons out the tone so that it's more consistently serious. And it's also got a much better villain than the Living Daylights. So these are two major improvements. And also the overplotting problem is gone. So this film actually improves and builds on the success of the Living Daylights. I'd say the only way in which this film is slightly weaker than the previous film is in the treatment of the Bond girl. But that's only really because I regard Clara as one of the most exceptional Bond girls. And the critical reception of this film, as I was saying, is really strange. The reason why a lot of fans didn't like it was because it didn't seem like a Bond film compared to the Connery Bonds or the Moore Bonds. But this is actually a real irony because it's the opposite of the case to anyone who has a passing familiarity with the books. It's exactly what a Bond film should be like because it's so true to the novels and the short stories. But in general, it's also understandable why audiences and critics were so confused at the time, because it was completely at odds with the legacy of the family-friendly cinematic Bond that we got used to under Roger Moore. But there you go. In my opinion, Licence to Kill don't really put a foot wrong, and it's very gratifying to watch if you're a fan of the novels. But I guess I should close by saying something about Timothy Dalton. But actually I think Sanchez said it best, so I'll give him the final word.
You have class.
So for me, Licence to Kill just falls slightly short of being a perfect Bond film. And the only reason for that is the Bond girl. Because a perfect Bond for me must include a very exceptional Bond girl. And while the girls in this film are good, I don't think they're exceptional. The only two Bond girls who I think of as absolutely exceptional so far are Marion Dabo in the previous film and Tanya way back in From Russia with Love. But overall, these are very minor flaws in what I regard as one of the best Bond films overall. And Licence to Kill for me is the best Bond film we've seen since Goldfinger, since 1963. And it only just falls slightly shy of the gold standard of From Russia with Love. But anyway, in summary, I'd say this film is bloody brilliant. But there you go, that's 16 down and only 9 to go. It only remains for me to say that this is Barry Butters signing out, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Be polite and answer the man.
You what?
To win your next match, use the element which brings life.
What?